Do I see overwhelming issues with this case writ large that nobody has seen or talked about? Yes, I do.
The author of a new book about the Idaho murders, raising questions about the evidence and Bryan Kohberger's guilty plea.
And I think I'm the first lightning rod that takes, that people talk about. But there are others coming. This is not over. This is the beginning.
Could Kohberger's case end up back in court? I'm Angenette Levy, and this is Crime Fix. Before we get into talking about this new book, I want to tell you about an app I've been using that I really like. It's called Upside. It will give you cash back on things you use all of the time, like gas, groceries, and carry out. Here's what you do. You download Upside for free. You claim an offer at one of their 100,000 plus locations, and you pay like you normally would with a credit card. Then you verify the purchase, and boom, you get money back. So say I need gas or I want takeout one night. I'll search for Upside's offers first. After I spend, money appears in my app that I can transfer straight into my bank account. Upside's frequent users earn an average of $254 a year. Who can beat that? So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan that QR code that you see right there on your screen and use our promo code CRIMEFIX to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Bryan Kohberger is serving 4 consecutive life sentences in Idaho's maximum security institution for the horrific murders of Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Chapin and Xana Kernodle. In prison, he's a number, 163214. Kohberger pleaded guilty to those gruesome murders, the stabbing deaths of those 4 beautiful college students back in July of 2025. We all watched it unfold on camera. The plea was somewhat of a shock, because Kohberger's defense team was heading toward trial despite losing every motion to suppress evidence and a last-ditch effort to delay the trial after a massive leak of evidence to the NBC show Dateline. The investigation into that leak, I've learned, is ongoing. Kohberger pleaded guilty. He said he committed the crimes and waived his right to appeal, although, as I've told you before here on Crime Fix, he can still appeal. Now a new book, available as you're watching this, is raising questions about the evidence used to arrest Bryan Kohberger, and it's revealing new claims that we haven't heard before. The author of this book, Chris Whitcomb, a former FBI agent, was provided with things that the public hasn't seen, tens of thousands of files and expert reports. He's written about it in his new book, Broken Plea. Now, experts for Bryan Kohberger's defense team, who fully expected to go to trial and were shocked when he pleaded guilty, cooperated with Whitcomb for the book. Only 2 allowed their names to be used. They were former FBI agent Chris Holland and criminologist Dr. Brent Turvey. In the book, Whitcomb questions the chain of custody regarding the K-bar knife sheath found next to Maddie Mogen's leg on her bed. DNA analysis revealed that Kohberger's DNA was found on the leather strap of that sheath. Turvey claims to have discovered the potential issue with the chain of custody in the days before the plea deal was announced. And Whitcomb says it could have resulted in the sheath being tossed out as evidence. Now, we don't know if that's true. Typically, an issue like that is litigated far before a trial. Chris Whitcomb will explain this issue for you very shortly. The book also includes details about interviews with Bryan Kohberger's mother and father after Kohberger's arrest. FBI agents interviewed Michael and Marianne Kohberger. Marianne Kohberger called Bryan "my angel." She told an FBI agent that her son was not acting strangely when he came home for Christmas break in 2022. She also said he wasn't dating anyone and didn't have many friends. It didn't sound like she knew about his troubles at WSU. Now, those interviews are things that I have requested from the FBI and Moscow police, and those requests have been denied. So I want to bring in the author of this new book, Broken Plea, Chris Whitcomb. He is a former FBI agent. He's also worked in the intelligence community. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure, appreciate talking to you. Thank you.
How did you get involved in writing this book about the Idaho case?
I had just finished, I was finishing another book about another crime, a missing persons crime from about 30 years ago. And I was having coffee with a former FBI colleague. We started talking about what we're doing, catching up, and he told me about this case. And I had not heard about it. I'd been buried in 2 books for 2 years. And when I'm writing, I'm pretty much in the project. So he started explaining it to me, and I said, well, look, they've made the arrest. It seems like the evidence is overwhelming. It's headed for trial. Why would I have any interest? And I didn't. I went on with what I was doing. Then he came back and he said, well, take a look at this. And he started to show me things that he had seen that he was working on because he had access for various reasons. And I started to realize very quickly that things I saw in the file did not match with the narrative that was being discussed pretty widely. It was a very sensationalized case. So that piqued my interest, and over time, over a couple of weeks probably, I saw more and more documents. I became more and more involved, and eventually we ended up here.
What were the things that really stood out to you, those things that you found most interesting?
The two things that I was introduced to first was Paulette Sutton's report, which showed anomalies, many people would call them anomalies, but things that stood out, because you have 3 discrete crime scenes within this house itself. It's a large house, 3 stories, 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. We all know the house. The bedroom on the 3rd floor looked like a traditional crime scene. The bedroom on the 2nd floor, Xana's bedroom, looked very, very similar. The characteristics, the blood spatter, the things that you would see in a homicide of this investigation, an investigation like this, a homicide investigation. And then the common areas of the 2nd floor, how the killers got from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor, based on Paulette Sutton's report, eventually on Dr. Brent Turvey's report, and what I was seeing, it stood out as very, very different. The blood that was diluted with an unknown substance, many, many things that stood out as problematic. Then as I got looking into the details of the case, the knife sheath came up, and the knife sheath seemed to be problematic. From there, it became more and more compelling and led to an examination that turned into this book.
Let's talk about, let's break that down a little bit. Let's go back to the blood with the diluted substance. We've seen that in kind of the little snippets of the expert reports that have been released. And this is discussed also in your book. How is it that they're unable to determine what the blood would have been diluted with? I'm kind of confused by that, because I would think that a lab would maybe look for that or be able to tell, but is that just too CSI?
I think it's kind of CSI. It's amazing what technology can do now. But I do believe very strongly, and I talk about it in great depth in this book, that the public thinks DNA analysis, and forensic testing of dried fluids, in this case serum fluids, she brought up mucus and blood. It's very different than what many, many people think. So the lab reports were fairly straightforward. You go down, it's a continuum, right? So you take a sample from a crime scene, in this case, either blood samples or swabs of those, goes to a lab, and they test them for certain things. First, is it blood? Does it test positive for blood? If so, it could go type, it could go various things along the way that end up with a microscopic DNA examination that would hopefully be able to trap that specific sample to a specific person. So along that continuum, things go wrong, things become confusing. Mixtures of blood can be particularly confusing. And in this case, trying to determine the chemical composition of something that would dilute blood from the blood itself, because you don't want to compromise the blood itself. So I think there are many chemicals, and I say I think because I'm not a chemist, I'm not a forensic chemist, but based on everything that I've read in the files, seems to indicate that if there were a chemical composition like bleach or like a Lysol type disinfectant, if that were the case, that may have left something that you could analyze chemically. In this case, there was no record of that, which might indicate that it was water, but no one ever said. Paulette Sutton in her report talked about the lab reports, which said the blood stains found in the common areas of the 2nd floor, outside the 3rd floor bedroom and outside the 2nd floor bedroom, those were almost all found to be diluted with an unknown substance. Her words, that's a quote. And that, of course, creates the immediate question, why? Why were the blood stains in the 3rd floor characteristic of what one expect to find in a scene like that? And why would they match the 2nd floor bedroom? And why would this very large area down the hallway from the 2nd floor bedroom across the living room, the beer pong table, moving up the staircase into the third floor bedroom. Why would those bloodstains, and they were prolific, there were a lot of bloodstains, why would those look different? Why would they test different? Why would they prove to be different in the characteristics? What happened that altered the chemical composition, the physical characteristics of those bloodstains? And that had not been addressed, but it presents, at least in my estimation, and other law enforcement people I talked to, really significant questions. And then we went from there.
Yeah, I mean, if it had been something like bleach, I mean, I know enough, I've covered enough cases to know that just kills DNA.
Yes. Well, it can.
So, that it's done. So, that is very interesting, and it would have been interesting to see how the experts would have answered those questions at trial. Let's move on.
Well, we know
now.
that. If you want to go into that, we know the answer to that.
Okay, then tell me.
Paulette Sutton did her report toward the end of the investigation in preparation for trial. The trial date had been set. This report was designed and intended for the prosecution to present and say to the jury, look at these photographs, look at this analysis by a forensic analyst, Paulette Sutton, and then Dr. Turvey came and analyzed it, and they went back and forth. But she's very specific. The physical, the visual, and the chemical composition of those stains found on the second floor were different. How they got there is pretty straightforward. What happened to them after they got there or during the process, that is up for debate to this day.
Let's move on now to the sheath.
Right.
The sheath is as close as you're going to get to a so-called smoking gun in this case. I mean, that without the sheath, in my opinion, there's no probable cause for Bryan Kohberger's arrest. I mean, I don't care how many white vehicle identifications you have. I mean, that is the probable cause in this case. So what are the issues that you and these defense experts, the reports that you've been provided, what are these chain of custody issues that you raise? I read in the book that you talk about how Talbot, the one ISP and crime scene guy, he was like the lead there.
He's the lead detective.
He says like in one report, like, well, he found it on the floor, but then, it's photographed on the bed. And he wrote that report a few weeks after being at the scene and collecting that. But there, it sounds like there's more to it, in your opinion, than that. So explain to me what you think these chain of custody issues are as it relates to the sheath.
I'll point out that you talked to Dr. Turvey, I believe, or you were going to talk to Dr. Turvey. He was brought in to look specifically at that knife sheath. What stood out to him initially was the placement of the sheath in the bed relative to blood spatter, and he looked at transference and various things like that. The first thing that I saw when I started to look into it was in the disclosure of the documents, or my access to non-disclosed documents, the Idaho State Police during the, so let's back up. The Moscow Police Department do the crime scene. Officer Nunez does an affidavit, which led to a search warrant. The search warrant led to an Idaho State Police forensic unit that came in and processed the crime scene. They had a standardized form, which has a place to handwrite in details as you collect evidence. On item number 14, which I believe was the second page of the report, the Idaho State Police hand wrote, I can't remember if it was a pencil or a pen. I think it was a pen, but it wrote item number 14, which was the knife sheath. So it says knife sheath found on floor next to victim number 3. So the first thing I thought of, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say he meant to write found next to the victim on floor number 3. However, on the next line, or the line after that, he specifically states that Maddie Mogen, where the knife was found under her thigh, he identified her as victim number 3. So let's just say that there's no conspiracy here whatsoever. Let's just say that's what he wrote, contemporaneous with picking up the knife sheath, and he says it was found on the floor. Why is that a problem in any way? Who cares where it was found? That's a problem because by the time he wrote his typed formal report of the collection of the evidence, it was submitted, I think it was December 6th. It was about 3 weeks later, roughly 3 weeks later. Now it's in that report, it is suddenly found in the bed, and it becomes a different issue because of the body cam from Officer Nunez when he goes into the bedroom and films Officer Warner directly proximal to where the knife would have been, meaning his thigh was very close to it, and that he did not mention it in his report, nor did Officer Nunez. So you start a path of questions about that sheath. Why is it important, as you just asked? Because that is, I agree with you. It's not the white car. It's not the cell tower dumps. It is that knife sheath that becomes the critical piece of evidence because it contained DNA, and we go from there. Now, getting specifically to chain of custody, many people outside law enforcement or the legal community would say, who cares? Who cares about a chain of custody? You care for this reason, and they teach this at academies from the beginning. When an officer picks up a piece of evidence, places it in a bag, and it goes to a laboratory, the defendant and the defense on his or her behalf want to be able to prove that that was not compromised somewhere along the way. In this case, that knife went into a bag. The bag was sealed, and it was signed. It went from there to the Idaho State Police Lab. This is all in reports. There's nothing unusual about this. However, it did not have affixed to it a chain of custody form. It was a bag. It had a barcode at the bottom, and the Idaho State, or excuse me, the law enforcement has said various things about that, but it had no chain of custody. Later, it suddenly ended up with two forms which were handwritten chain of custody, saying it went from officer so-and-so to officer so-and-so to the lab, to the evidence room, and eventually to the laboratory. If you look at those photographs, they appear to most people, including myself, to be written in the same pen, a black marker, and in one handwriting. Why would that be a problem? Because it is falsification of the record. And my point in all of this is, if I were the defense attorney, Ann Taylor, or any other defense attorney, the first thing I would challenge in a court of law is the provenance of that knife sheath from the crime scene to the time it gets to the FBI laboratory. And that's a fairly significant path. So the next question I've heard people come up with, and they say, well, why didn't Ann Taylor bring it up prior to trial and make it an issue? And the answer, and it's a very, very compelling answer, is that she did not know it. This was not found until the team found the chain of custody anomaly. They presented it to Dr. Brent Turvey, and that ended up being presented because he was there to look at the provenance of the knife sheath. He presented it to Ann Taylor. However, and everybody needs to know this because I know many people talk about it, Ann Taylor did not see this trouble with the chain of custody until I think 4 days, specifically 4 days before Bryan Kohberger took a change of plea. So she did not challenge it because she did not know about it until just before he changed his plea.
But I guess my question would be, if she is notified that there's this chain of custody issue and that, oh my God, you could go back and get the entire case. I mean, maybe not the entire case, because that if that could have been litigated, why didn't she go back to the court and say, hold the phone? We've discussed, or we've discovered that there's a major potential chain of custody issue here, and we need to file a motion to suppress this knife sheath because we believe that there is some type of, and we think we have the evidence to show in good faith that there was a chain of custody issue here, and we're going to file this motion. Why? Because the plea deal was in the works and they wanted to wrap it up and move on?
First of all, that's an excellent question. And thank you for talking this out, because in writing a 430-page book based on hundreds of thousands of bits of data, this is one. I mean, you're talking about a small number of pages in this book. A lot of people don't understand it, and nobody's asked questions in the meaningful way that you have. But I would say two things. One, you'd have to ask Ann Taylor, number one. Number two, I think it's very obvious. Dr. Turvey, I talked to Dr. Turvey in putting this book together, but I talked to 3 other sources who were involved in law enforcement or on the defense side. So I'm not just getting all this information from him. But I think what rises as the answer to your question is that this didn't happen in a vacuum. Bryan Kohberger did not change his plea. He woke up and walked into her office and said, I'm going to change and plead guilty. The days leading up to this are shrouded in mystery. Nobody knows when the deal was made. Nobody knows how it was made. And I say deal for this reason. It was a death penalty prosecution that right up to the scheduled day of trial was supposed to be that. The obvious change was Bryan Kohberger pled to 4 counts of murder with life imprisonment. So it took the death penalty off the table. In something of that consequence, it is reasonable to believe that there was a lot going on between the defense and the prosecution. We know the mitigation team was on the defense side was involved. So what I'm saying is, to me, the obvious answer to your question is there was so much going on. Ann Taylor had lost almost every single motion in limine.
She lost everything.
She lost everything. She lost everything. So it is plausible for me to believe that at the end, 4 days away from going to trial, or very, very briefly before trial, she probably looked at it and said what many people said: who cares about a chain of custody issue? I disagree wholeheartedly. If I had ever taken a case to an assistant United States attorney as an FBI agent building a case, I would have been laughed at. I would have had serious questions, probably disciplinary issues, if I had presented evidence with these issues. Now, why did that not come to trial? Because she didn't know about it till the end. I can say that unequivocally. Why she made that decision, I don't know, but it seems plausible at that point that she'd lost at every single solitary turn, and she had been presented with an offer, and she was in the process of working that out. Do I know that specifically? No. But do I know that it was presented at the end? People say, why didn't she make this a point in the case? I do know that. Yes, I do know that.
So Bryan Kohberger on July 2nd, 2025 walks into court, and there's a statement of facts laid out. You write about it in your book. And they ask him if he's guilty, if he broke into the house with the intent to commit the crime of murder. And he says yes 4 times.
He also said guilty 4 times. I mean, Judge Hippler went over this again and again and again.
So he's basically saying, like, you got me. I mean, I was in the courtroom. I watched him. I sat there. He said
guilty. There was unequivocal. He said yes, and he was guilty. Yes.
Yes, he said it. And I remember as Bill Thompson was reading the statement of facts, I literally had a bird's eye view of Bryan Kohberger, and he sat there. He just stared at Bill Thompson the entire time. I don't think he blinked, maybe twice the entire time. And he was listening intently to everything that Bill Thompson said. It was almost as if, in my view, it was like he was listening to see if he got it right, and if it was all correct. And so you've seen far more than the rest of us have. Do you believe that Bryan Kohberger committed these crimes factually, from a factual perspective?
I think you've read the book, right? You've read the book, or at least a lot of the book.
I've read much of the book.
Okay. In all of the book, in every single page of the book, I've said 2 things unequivocally. I don't have an opinion. I don't have a theory. I don't speculate. I say, this is the evidence. This is what occurred. And the very first pages of the book are that hearing. The book says—
you were an FBI agent for years.
Right. But I can't— okay. If I come out and say what I think, immediately I corrupt everything that I've said in the book, because it's not about what I think. My job here, as I perceive it, was not to say this is a wrongful conviction. I do not shill for the defense. I do not say I'm a former cop, therefore I'm all law enforcement. What I say is I, Chris Whitcomb, stipulate, as lawyers would say, to the fact that he pleaded guilty. And I agree with every word that you've just said. But in the criminal justice system today, do people always plead guilty to things because they're guilty? One might argue that sometimes they do it to make a deal. The plea deal permeates every law enforcement television show, every book, everything you've ever seen in your life, because people take deals all the time. I'm not here to argue why Bryan Kohberger did it or did not take the plea. And I will say that I have great respect for the fact that you were there, and I value your opinion, what you saw. I was not there when he said those things. But we all know, and we have all talked about in great detail, Bryan Kohberger's social, I don't know, it's not a diagnosis, but the things— let me just say this to frame it. Ann Taylor filed a motion in limine and had to get Bill Thompson to agree in a hearing before Judge Hippler that the prosecution would not refer to him in court as a psychopath. right? That is court record. So there was a perception among you and me and various other people that he acted very oddly when he showed up in his interviews, the traffic stops, everything else. And I think that a person looking objectively would have to say, I don't know what's going on in Bryan Kohberger's head. He's a very, very odd guy. So looking behaviorally at a crime is important. And I agree with you. Looking behaviorally at him is very important. But if you're going to do that, you have to look at Bryan Kohberger and say, there's a behavioral characteristic of the crimes themselves. What happened to each of the victims? So is it valid? Yes, your points are very valid. Do I say that Bryan Kohberger did or did not do it? No, I do not, nor do I have an opinion for this book or talking to you. Do I see overwhelming issues with this case writ large that nobody has seen or talked about? Yes, I do. And I'll say this too. I'm the first one that put this together and came out with something. But I will tell you unequivocally, there are books and other projects coming out in the not distant future that will look at other aspects of this case. And I think I'm the first lightning rod that takes, that people talk about. But there are others coming. This is not over. This is the beginning.
Do you think that this is the last that we've heard of Bryan Kohberger? As you know, part of this plea bargain did not include him, sitting down for a proffer. It did not include him allocuting. He didn't have to offer. He didn't have to give anything.
Nothing.
He didn't have to offer any corroborating information, which stuns me because I interviewed Bill Thompson and I said, you didn't even get a proffer from him.
Nothing.
Like you didn't get anything.
Nor was it required. Nor was there any stipulation. I've seen all the talk, and Judge Hippler says you can't mandate it. And I would say, yes, of course, that's the case. But there are certain things about Idaho. You can't take an Alford plea in this case. You can't do certain things. And one of those things is a condition of a plea agreement could have included allocation. That's certainly an option.
They could have said, we'll take death off the table, but you need to sit down. He needs to sit down with us, Ann Taylor, and we need some corroborating information. It could have been as simple as that. Where did he put the knife? So anything. Where are the clothes? Did he bury the clothes? Because we know about the shovel and
just explain the weapons. I mean, we've never found the blunt force trauma inflicted on Kaylee. Nobody even talks about the fact that something used to attack her was taken out of the house. Nobody's even ever mentioned that. It's seldom mentioned.
I've talked to people. I talked to somebody an expert who said it could have been as easy as using the K-bar with a fist.
That some of them is possible. Yes, some of that is possible. But it was not part of the dialogue.
Yeah, I'm just saying, there are a number of explanations for that. Those horrific injuries. But I guess my point is, I am not convinced that we've heard the end of Bryan Kohberger. I've been saying that for a while. I don't know if there's a habeas petition possibly in the works, depending on the outcome of the Dateline leak investigation. And we don't know really what's going on with that. But I'm just saying to you, I'm not sure. It just seemed all just a little bit too tidy. And I'm not sure anything in life is really ever that tidy.
I can only say thank you, because I've talked to so many people, and many of them were very, during the last week, talking in podcasts and things like this. I've talked to so many bright people that have been very involved in this case for 3.5 years. And I'm talking about attorneys. I'm talking about people retired from law enforcement. I've talked about podcasters who followed this, other journalists who followed it. You were the very first person that I've talked to that had meaningful representations of fact in the context of how criminal justice works. And I'm grateful for you bringing that sense and perspective. Ask questions. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I think it's critically important that we ask questions. And you're the first person I've spoken with that asked those intelligent questions, and I'm grateful.
Well, so do you know the answer?
I know the answer to a lot of these questions. I do. I listen.
Are you going to tell? So, answer my question. Are we going to hear more? Is more coming from Bryan?
Please. I'm not gonna curse in your show, but my emotion would shine through, and insert anything before yes, right? Insert an adjective before yes. I think I believe, based on what I know about other people that are working on other angles of this case, right? And one might speculate who those people are. There are a lot of experts, and there was a lot of outrage. There was a lot of outrage in this case by people who worked really hard trying to find answers, who believed passionately in his defense or believed in the veracity of the prosecution's use of the evidence as it was gathered. And many of those people came to me. I didn't get all this from one person. I got it from different people that I respected, that I verified and validated. And those people are not done. Those people are not done. This is a book that brings us up to this point in time. There's more coming. I'm the beginning. I'm not the end of this.
So there are people associated with Bryan Kohberger's defense team who are still working to try to uncover what they believe was a miscarriage of justice. They don't believe he's guilty.
Correct. Yes.
And so do you know if the lawyers are part of that?
I do not know that. That's another great question. I wish I'd talked to you a long time ago, but the answer is I don't know. I have no idea what Ann Taylor and her legal staff are doing, planning, anticipate, whatever. I have zero insight into that in any way. I would only trust that Ann Taylor is a ward of Bryan Kohberger's best interest, and she's looking at various options. But that's just my speculation based on the fact that she's a professional attorney.
Dr. Turvey had said, I haven't seen his report. I've only seen what you wrote in your book. And obviously the disclosure information that came out that was unsealed, that, you know, he was going to testify that there were at least two perpetrators.
Yes.
Based on your review of the evidence, do you believe that?
Yes.
Chris Whitcomb, author of Broken Plea, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for talking. Thank you.
Now, it's important to note that Chris Whitcomb believes, let's say that Bryan Kohberger does go back to court and try to appeal, that it would be a long shot. I reached out to Ann Taylor to ask her about the claims that she was notified about this potential chain of custody issue with the K-bar knife sheath. At the time of this recording, I have not heard back from her, but I should mention she has never responded to any of my emails. I will let you know if she does respond to this one. And that is it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.